Hi, I'm Brian.
Okay, so here we are getting prepared to put the rafters up. I've done some work here, a lot of measuring and a little bit of cutting. Not real exciting, but a lot of thinking. I worked this all out with the math as far as, where the notches should be, the bird's mouth cut that would make so the rafter can sit where the spot where the rafter sits on the plate, the cap plate, so that's actually a flat spot. There's a cut called a bird's mouth cut. Like I said, I did all the math to find out kind of what angle that should be at and where it should be placed so that my rafters, my 16-foot rafters, have 2 feet of overhang on each side of the building. That's a 12-foot building. And there's a little bit, once you tip that rafter, it's a little bit less than that, but it's pretty close. So I did all the math, but I also just kind of laid the rafters up there and stood them on end and kind of made some marks right where the cap plates are, and everything sort of, the math and where they fell when I put them up there actually kind of worked out the way it should, so that was all good. But there was a lot of thinking about that. So I've actually cut all the rafters. I'll just show you one up close here. So there's a couple things going on here. Number one is that bird's mouth cut that I talked about. Here's an example of a bird's mouth cut. Now, because my roof slope is not a lot, that bird's mouth isn't much. There's just a little notch there because the angle isn't very steep on the roof. The other thing that is also a small angle is the ends of each of the rafters are cut off at a slight angle. Works out in my case to be about 7.5 degrees or so, again, based on the pitch of the roof. So that's so that when the rafters come out off the end of the roof, they're not actually angled at the angle of the roof. They're actually cut to be plumb, level to the ground, just so that the gutter sits nice and everything. And so there'll be a fascia board on the end that'll be flat to those rafters, but they all had to be cut plumb on both ends. So I've made all those cuts. So now I'm going to put them all up. I've got 13 rafters kind of from one end wall to the other end wall, and then there's actually 2 extras that kind of hang out over the ends of the building, and those they have the same cuts at the end, the plumb cut at the end, but they don't have the bird's mouth cut because they don't sit on the caps of the cap plates of the walls. They just kind of hang out in space, and they'll be hung out there with some blocking. So it's time to put them up. All right, so here I am putting the rafters up. I would say it's not that this was all that hard of a job. I'd say most of the work was kind of, as I already described, put into figuring out kind of where to cut the notches and things. But once those boards were all cut and ready to be put up, this wasn't all that difficult of a job, but it is a little slow and time consuming. It definitely would be better as a 2-person job, I'd say. And I do have people who are definitely willing to help me, and I do appreciate that, but sometimes I don't even know how things are going to go for myself, let alone trying to tell somebody how to help me do it. So I did work through a lot of these steps on my own just because I wasn't sure what to expect. But this was one that definitely was really time consuming and tedious for one person. The hardest thing I would say about this process here is, where I made the majority of my mistakes in the whole build was really when I got comfortable with something or confident. And for example, when I put these rafters up and they fit, I get really excited about it. But then when you start to hammer these rafter ties in, a lot of manual hammering here, which is a chore in itself. As things started to move around, I got kind of sloppy sometimes. I was so excited that things were there and stuff was going up that I didn't pay attention that things were moving around sometimes. So I actually had to undo several of these rafters, and it really is a pain to actually undo rafter ties once you've attached them. So really I would suggest make sure you're sure that everything's kind of set where you want it before you start hammering these things together, because it really is tough to kind of back up once you get going. But wasn't all that bad of a job even with one person, and I got better as I went along. So this step wasn't too bad. There's 2 down. I think I have to go through 11. So, but that's it. That's 12 interior joists. Again, those all use the same kind of diamond rafter tie. On the end, I need a different rafter tie, but this took me a lot longer than I expected it to. That's unfortunate, but I think everything's all right. So I will finish up the last couple rafters tomorrow and put some blocking. All right, so forgive me for not including all the rafters going up, but it was kind of a tedious process putting those up there and getting all those rafter ties nailed in. And the board's got a little, you know, they're 16-foot long boards, so they got a little squirrely at times, a little bent and twisted. But we've got the blocking in, so we cut pieces of blocking for a couple different purposes, right? To close up the gap that'll be there when we put the roof sheathing on top. There would have been a hole right there, right, from the inside to the outside of the building. So it's for that, to cover that hole. And number two, it also allowed us to kind of stiffen up these rafters and kind of straighten them up if they were a little twisted, which many of them were. Not too uncommon for a 16-foot board. So it allowed us to kind of straighten those up a lot. So it looks a lot better now, I think, than it did. So we've got blocking all along the front edge, all along the back edge. This is all the rafters except the one kind of flying rafter that I've been calling it. I think that's the right term. That'll be out here. It's going to be 18 inches out, and one over here, 18 inches out. And that measurement is to give us a 27-foot across roof, which is on purpose because the metal roof panels are 3 feet each. So that'll give us nine metal panels going across. So we were going for 27 feet. So we'll have 18-inch overhang on these sides, and we have 2 foot in the front and the back. So right now what we're about to do is put on kind of the front fascia board. We've cut 2 pieces to meet in the middle, much like the base, the rim joist on the flooring. So yeah, we'll start a piece in the middle and run it out, and it'll overhang 18 inches. We'll have one over there that'll overhang 18 inches, and then we'll put our kind of flying rafters in between those, and then add blocking to stabilize those flying rafters. And then once we've done that, we're ready to put our roof sheathing on, so our 1/2-inch plywood. So we're off. Oh, somebody is working here, and then somebody, I guess, is going swimming. I don't know. Safety first on the job site. That's awesome.
So what are those things you're putting on? Side plate?
So this is blocking.
Blocking.
Because there will be plywood up here. So if you didn't do anything, there'd be a hole. So this is
right.
It's stiffening up. It's stiffening up the rafters and helping straighten them a little bit because they're long. They tend to bow a little bit.
Sweet.
And it's closing the gap.
Sweet tool man, ice bag. I mean, sweet tool bag, ice man.
Sweet tool man, ice bag. That one's
oh, and we have
you have to go over there.
A special guest, Jared Redwine, who is cutting. What's he cutting, Brian? What's he cutting? He's cutting it. He's gonna cut these. I already forgot what you call them. Side plate.
No, that's what you called them before.
Oh, what were they? What were they again? I forgot.
I don't know.
I'll try to commit it to the old memory bank.
Blocking. They're just blocking.
Blocking. Here comes. Oh, we got.
Good.
We got to frame this.
Oh,
Sandy.
geez. Oh,
boy. We can edit that. We can edit this out.
Oh my God! Tom Cruise is back. Top Gun in theaters next year. Maverick himself here to promote.
You want to play volleyball on the beach? Hey, how's Kelly McGillis doing?
He's gonna say a couple words here and put a shirt on real quick. Go ahead, Sam. Tell him about that.
All right.
Oh,
that's a wrap.
All right, so here's a good spot for me to maybe say a couple of thank yous to some people who helped me once again. You can see there Jared in the red shirt there, and Sam down on the ground, aka Maverick from the last scene there. They came out to help for a day or two, and you'll see later on Taylor, our neighbor from Benson, and Bill from the Upside of Downsizing, our neighbor across the street. Came over to help a little bit, and again I consulted some old friends from back in our city living days, Craig and Steve. So I just want to thank everybody for their help along the way. Definitely came in handy for some of these steps specifically like you're seeing right now, but a good time also to mention that sometimes a great set of extra hands is a couple of clamps, which I used in a lot of places here. This step you're seeing here, there's a lot of clamping going on, and it's a good way to straighten some boards out before you nail or screw them together and get some boards to meet before you nail or screw them together. So we did that a lot. I think it was Steve that suggested me to use some clamps to straighten some things out, and I don't know why I didn't think of it before, but it came in really handy on a lot of steps to kind of pull boards into line. Because I made a pretty good drawing on paper, but wood isn't perfect, so the clamps help persuade things into position a lot of times, and we got a lot of use out of them. So.
Okay, so here we are with the front and back fascia. Front and back fascia. All done. All the blocking is done to plug up these holes here on the front and the back. We're going to quit for the day because it's getting kind of late here. We're going to have some dinner, but the last thing to do before sheathing the roof with plywood is the last rafter that hangs out here between the front and the back fascia board.
Okay, so here's day 2 of having Jared's help out here. He spent the night with us in our guest house, luxury guest house. You can kind of catch a glimpse of it in the back there. It's a pop-up trailer, kind of having a temporary home here from a friend of ours. Thanks, Billy. But even in August here, the temperatures are pretty nice for spending the night outside, so that's a nice little perk. That first flying rafter you can see went up pretty easy. It fits so tight in between those fascia boards, the front and the back, that once we kind of wedged it in there, we didn't even really have to hold on to it. I just kind of screwed it in place. This second one didn't fit quite as well, and you can see me messing around with some clamps down there again, because it was hard to hold it in the exact position I needed and still screw everything together. So that one took a little more coercing. But this wasn't too hard to fit. It was definitely the right thing to do to put those fascia boards on to kind of hold this. But of course that's not enough support for that end rafter, which is why our next step is to add some blocking pieces from the last rafter kind of over the wall to that flying rafter out there. Just a couple of blocking pieces down the side. And you'll see us again using the magical clamp. Even with 2 people, you know, it's difficult to lean on something and hold it in position, and you know, it's really tough to do all that stuff. So a clamp or a set of clamps really are invaluable in a job like this. So I'm glad Steve made the suggestion, because that saved, I think, a lot of headaches, and that fixed a lot of problems. So other than that, it went pretty well. This again was nice to have 2 people kind of inside and outside, just so I can avoid kind of getting up and down a ladder and moving stuff all the time. So this definitely came in handy to have an extra person here. I showed the first flying rafter here, and we just kind of did the second one the same way. They went up not too bad. Worked out kind of the way we planned on it.
Okay, so there's our fly rafter. Same thing on the other end. Can't see as good from here, but there it is there, just kind of hanging out in space. It's held by the fascia boards on the front and the back. It's kind of sandwiched between those. And it's got some blocking in here just to keep it in and out stable. And that's where the plywood will come out to the edge of that. So that gives us a 1.5 foot overhang on this end, 2 feet on the front and the back. Next, our last step, I think, before putting the roof sheathing on is we're just going to put some 2x4 blocking up and down. You can almost call them cripples, but they're not really bearing anything. They were in my drawing on my SketchUp, but they're really just nailers for the sheathing and the siding that we're going to put on, to nailers in this little triangle gap up here. So that's what we're going to do next.
Okay, so here we're finally getting to the sheathing that I've talked about for so long. Keep saying there's one more step to go. So the first thing we do is there's Taylor helping me out there. We just threw a couple sheets up there and made some measurements to see where things were going to fall on the rafters as far as attaching the sheathing, because it turns out, and you can see we just grabbed one, we actually had to cut the first piece a little bit, and that's because we left that 18-inch overhang on the end. So normally, you know, if you were doing a standard spacing on all of your rafters. If there wasn't that overhang, you know, your first full sheet would have fallen right on a rafter, much like the floor did. But because we put that extra piece out there and it wasn't the same spacing as the rest of the rafters, we had to cut the first sheet. So the first thing we did was throw some sheets up there and just check our squareness to make sure, you know, you don't want to start laying that stuff down and have it line up kind of on one edge, and on the other edge it starts to walk kind of off of the line, you know, one way or the other. So we just did some eyeball tests at first, putting the stuff up there to make sure everything was square, and it looked pretty good. So we started cutting the pieces and put them up there. What we had to do basically was, for this size of roof, we had to cut our first panel just slightly. I think we had to cut it 6 inches. And then we put 2 full sheets, and then we ended up with about a half sheet, actually 6 inches less than a half sheet at the far end. And then we would start the next row kind of the opposite. We would start with that half sheet and a couple of full sheets, and then end up with that almost full sheet at the end. So it just did that, I guess, 4 times. We have 4 rows of sheathing up here, which covers, those sheets are 4 feet wide, so that covers our 16 feet of roof. So, and it was sized that way for that reason, for those sheets to kind of fit that way. So it was sized for the sheeting, and it was sized for the metal panels. Like I said, is the reason we went with the width we went, was for the metal panels. So not anything real exciting here, and yeah, I wish I would have maybe put the camera in a position maybe that you could see from above, but I didn't. But just a lot of nailing here. So I started off just by kind of nailing the corners, and then went back later and put in a lot of nails. So here is the finished product, and it looks pretty good there from the top, nice and clean. Okay, so here we are the very next day. I'm with Bill from the Upside of Downsizing and our across the street neighbor, doing the roofing underlayment to go under the metal roofing. We wanted to get this done as quickly as possible, because once you put that sheathing up on the roof, you know, it's now susceptible to the rain and things. So this is to get it up there for some protection as quickly as possible. So Bill came over to help. He was very helpful. Again, another set of hands on this one was really nice, because so this is a synthetic underlayment paper. It's not like a tar paper. A tar paper is a little more papery. That sounds funny, but it's a little heavier and more papery. This stuff was plasticky, more like a membrane, and it really caught the wind. The slightest little breeze blew it like crazy. So it was nice to have another set of hands. And he also brought a stapler, which you're not supposed to actually install this stuff with staples, because it can actually puncture it, you know, in a way that will allow water through, and the wind will actually rip it through the staples sometimes. So it's recommended to use cap nails, which we did, nails with kind of a plastic disc on them, kind of like a washer, just to kind of give more surface area so that the paper doesn't pull through it. But so we did that, but the point was, Bill bringing that stapler saved us actually from trying to chase this paper all over the place every time the wind blew the slightest bit. So that came in really handy. You can see what we're doing here. You see some of the paper hanging off the front. What we did was, because of the low pitch of the roof, it was suggested by the manufacturer that you overlap the paper basically by half. So we did that, and we had enough paper on one roll to cover the whole roof, so I didn't mind overlapping it by half. So we actually started with half hanging off, and we took that half and took it up to the top when we were finished. And it went on pretty nicely, nice and tight. The nails were a little difficult sometimes. They were thin, and they wanted to bend sometimes. You had to be a little careful with them, but other than that, it went on pretty easy. So that'll do it for the roofing, at least up to this point. I ordered the metal roofing from the manufacturer right after we finished that step, but at least we've got it temporarily protected with some roofing paper. So we can actually sheathe the walls while we wait for the metal roofing to arrive. So that'll do it for now. Please stop back for the next one if you like what you're seeing, and like and subscribe and share it with some friends if you like, and come on back. And we've got several more steps to go, and can't wait to see the finished product. So come on back and see us.